First of all, thank you all for coming, and I want to show a bit of appreciation to the organizers. You guys are awesome. Thank you. So now let's do a bit of introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Levon. I'm a full stack engineer. I have over 8 years of experience in this field, and I started off with C++ and Java and very weird language called LabVIEW. I don't know how many of you will know about it. It's actually graphical, which is very weird. Like you don't type, you just attach things together. So I worked in different fields, starting from games, fintech, healthcare, educational systems, management systems, software for lawyers and stuff like that. So a lot of experience to go around. That's what I'm trying to say. Currently, I'm working in a company called Ava, and this is a music generation AI. Now, you might wonder, what does a full stack developer do in an AI company? And the answer is pretty simple. Since we are not creating a toy to create like just music that you can download, we are actually creating a tool for professionals. So you can actually see the layers and edit the notes and the instrumentation and effects that are going into this. So I'm building this whole stuff. That's why my role in the company. Okay, let's get to the presentation part, and this is the agenda for our presentation today. I'm going to talk about a bit the interview process and from the perspective of the interviewer, and after that I'm going to give you an example question and how I as an interviewer would expect my candidate to respond to that interview question. First of all, before we get into this part, it is very important to answer this question. So why you should trust me in anything that I say, right? To answer that question, I will give you a bit of a story time. About 2 years ago, I was working in a fintech company. Well, it is now a bank, actually. They converted, I think, a year ago. So during this time, I was doing whatever a front-end developer would do in a fintech company. So I was creating forms, I was submitting those forms to the backend, and the most interesting part that I was doing was error handling or like form validation, which is pretty boring. And the office looked like this at the time, and my face looked kind of like this. It was getting very tedious, and I'm sure some of you might understand this feeling when you're doing boring stuff all the day and you just get burned out. So I started looking into different opportunities in my area, and that's when I found out about a company called SoloLearn. Well, for those of you who don't know, SoloLearn is an app primarily. It is for the phones. And it teaches people how to code. It's a learning platform. It is mostly targeted for beginners, but also they have, I think like it is very valuable for people who already know how to code, but want to learn something new that they never did. For example, right now I'm doing their Golang course, and sometimes it can be pretty boring as well, because I spent like 2 courses learning how to make comments in Go. And it's, for someone to experience, you don't need two sections of comments. So at this point, when I found out about them and wrote to their HR team, they received quite a bit of money from as an investment. It was like something like 20 million or something like that. And they were doing a lot of upgrades, hiring a lot of people. And most importantly, they were doing renovations and relocating to a new office. And why is that important? Because as soon as I got there, the office looked something like this, which is a pretty horrible first impression, because you get into the office, everything is dirty, and there's a lot of noise around the office, and overall a pretty bad experience. So I was greeted by 2 developers, and we went into a meeting room to start the interview. And to give you a bit of a backstory of those developers, they were they were aged something like from 40 to 50 years old, and they were like very professional in what they did. They had experiences in their experience was all over the place. And well, what I'm trying to convey here, one of them actually had the iconic mustache that people imagine all the software developers have. So yeah, so it was. At first, it was really nerve-wracking because you see all this like professionalism and all the questions that they ask, and it gets a bit of nervous. So as soon as I got into the interview scene, they started asking me a bunch of questions, but their questions were pretty different from what I heard so far in different interviews. So they didn't do this classic, oh, what's the difference of double equal and triple equal, or what this, the output of this program is, or stuff like that. They asked me the first question, but in a different manner. They asked me, okay, you have double equals and triple equal in JavaScript. I want you to say which one of these will be faster. Which is a rather different question, and it forces you to think about what is going to happen during this time when you're doing double equal or triple equal. And actually, the interview process was incredibly interesting. They were asking me things about the structure of HTTP, when I would use REST instead of not REST, which is something I think most of backend engineers do not think about quite often. They just default to RESTful applications, right? They also asked me about dependency injection frameworks. Why would you use it, and why would you not use it, or does it even make sense to use one in a front-end application? So short answer is sometimes. It's really not straightforward answer. So at this point, they asked me something really interesting. They asked me how would I approach an issue where I need a singleton class in JavaScript. And my answer was that while you can do a singleton class in JavaScript in a traditional way of saving an instance inside of the class and not the object itself, and then returning that instance every time someone is calling, I said that it's not a really good approach to do something like that, because it still can be overwritten. You can still bypass all of that stuff. So the way I would do it is create a JavaScript module and create a class inside of that module, but only export one object of that module. And this is where it got really interesting, because one of the interviewers disagreed with me. He said that's not how things work in JavaScript, and every time you import a file, the entire file will be run again, and you will have another object of that class. And this pretty quickly became a war between the two of us. Because I was pretty sure that I'm right in this sense, right? Because I knew how JavaScript bundlers work. And I started to make a lot of arguments, and it was a lot of back and forth. I was trying to explain him what I think is right, and he was trying to explain me why I'm wrong. And it developed into this pretty heated argument, and it took over 10 minutes before the other interviewer stopped us, basically telling us, okay guys, this doesn't matter anymore, let's move on because we have other questions to ask. So we just moved on, and after like half an hour I went out, and oh, this slide actually doesn't really show you anything. It's a fast forward icon for just so you know.
Imagine a comment.
Yeah, imagine what happens after war. So okay, so fast forward about 2 hours, I was sitting in a park trying to cool down because I was pretty angry at my interviewer for what happened, and I was having my coffee when I received an email with a proposal of to work at SolarLearn. And the proposal was a much better salary, a higher position for what I applied for, well, it was a no-brainer at the time, right? Because it is a much better for what I was doing, and the project was much more interesting. So I accepted the job. I went there to work, and after a month or so of onboarding and stuff like that, I was talking with my now colleague, who was my interviewer at the time, and where we had this heated argument with, right? And I asked him why would he hire me after all of that, because I was being pretty stubborn given that I was in the position of somebody who was getting interviewed. And he basically gave me this answer that what he remembered from the interview. The first thing was that I was right. And this was pretty important. He went into, right after the interview, he went into Googling stuff, researching, and find out that I was correct in that argument. The second one was that I fought for what I thought was right, which was very important. I wasn't giving up about my position. And the third point was that I communicated my thoughts in a manner that was understandable for him, right? I was making arguments, explaining my position. So I was not just saying, "Oh, you're wrong and you're a stupid idiot trying to complain to me." So and also a very important part was that I'm trying to use this. Yeah, I was not insulting him at all. This is incredibly important when you're doing an interview. You should not come off as a full of yourself person. So you should kind of like leave the door open for the interviewer to see that, oh, you're eager to accept that you're wrong, but they need to prove you that. So I jumped a bit too fast to this image, because after 2 months I was the one who was doing the interviews. And I was the person who was asking all of these questions to the candidates, and the most dreaded questions that all of us have received at one point, right? And the kind of questions that you think, why would anybody ask me this question? This is what it represents. Like, because a lot of times you would be asked a question and you will think to yourself, why would anybody think of this question? I'm not going to use this at all, right? It's never coming up in my day-to-day job. Why would you even be interested in this? To answer this question, let me tell you what, as an interviewer, we are looking for in the candidate. First of all, we are interested in one kind of person you are. Are you an interested person? Are you looking at the weird stuff that is happening inside of JavaScript, which is quite common, right? All of the JavaScript developers know this. For like the most notorious example is how the context works in JavaScript, or how type coercion works, and all of that jazz. So what I'm interested in is, as you see that something weird is happening, are you interested enough to get into this topic and try to figure out how things work? And this will show me a part of you that is very important as a software engineer. This is basically the same thing. So, and the other part is, can you reason about these topics? Like, if I give you two very abstract topics and I will tell you, let's talk about context. And then after that, I ask you about, for example, I don't know, the prototype chain. Can you connect these two topics together? Because everything in programming is somehow connected, right? And it is very important for me to see that you are able to think in this abstract manner and connect to those two topics together. And the other part is, like, even if you're wrong, it might happen that you're wrong during the interview. Can you explain to me your thought process? Can you somehow justify why you think the way you think? And this is actually the main reason why interviewers do not tell you when you're wrong. Like, this happens quite a lot. When they ask you a question, you give a wrong answer and the interviewer just shuts up. He doesn't tell you anything, right? This is the main reason, because they want to see, can you justify your point? Can you tell them why you think you're right? So this is actually a phase that I see quite a lot when I'm interviewing people. So this is what I see when I ask you a question and you think to yourself, but you're not thinking out loud. Because I have no idea if you're thinking or not, right? From my perspective, you look like this. And this is horrible. But like, when I see this face, I'm not sure if you're actually thinking or you just don't have any kind of answer. This comes off as pretty weak. So the first tip of the day for interviews is think out loud. No matter what the question is, you should think out loud. You should tell the interviewer what you think about the topic. And this not only helps you to not look like this, but also helps the interviewer to give you direction when he asks you a question. Because we all understand as interviewers that we are more prepared for these questions than you are. Because you don't know what we are going to ask you, right? And we know what we are going to ask. So hopefully we know better about the topics and the memory is fresh. And we understand that sometimes candidates might forget some things, and it's very okay to forget some things, right? So when we ask you a question, we kind of expect you to think about the question and give us like a general thought process of how you approach the issues. And if we see that you're kind of drifting away, we will most likely put you in the right path because we want to hire you. That's why we have the open position. We want to hire you. So we will try our best to make you shine as much as you can. The second tip that I'm going to tell you is when I ask a question and I see that the candidate has some kind of answer in their head, but they're too afraid to tell me that. They're thinking, and this happens quite a lot as well, when I see that they're very afraid to talk out loud and tell me their opinions or what they think. And this is also pretty bad because this shows me that if when we get into an argument, if I hire you, right, and we get into the same team and you're my colleague and we get into the argument, you're going to give up pretty easily, right? You're not going to fight for what you think is right. And this means that we are going to have a bad decision made because you might have the right answer, you might have the better answer. And I need you to speak up when these situations happen. And I understand that this might might be a bit weird and counterintuitive that I'm focusing on these parts and not the technical parts, because I'm assuming that most of you guys here have a pretty good idea of what kind of technical questions the interviewers ask. But most of the times we are looking into other stuff when we are trying to validate the candidate. It's mostly not technical. It is like 60% technical and 40% this stuff. So the tip number 2 is to not be afraid of the interviewer. You should understand the interviewer does not have any kind of authority over you, even though they are the ones who write you the feedback, and they're the ones who will have to say if you're being hired or not. If you don't speak up and if you're afraid to voice your opinions, you're not going to get hired most of the times, 90% of the times. And the last one, which is the most infuriating one as an interviewer, when I see a candidate who is too full of himself. This is very hard. This kind of personality is very hard to deal with, right? And I understand that it is a bit counterintuitive to say this because I started off my talk with an example of how I was having a fight with my interviewer. But you must understand that the confidence must come from the knowledge. So you should be confident. That is very good when you're confident during the interview, but you should not be overconfident and too full of yourself. So you should always leave the door open for the interviewer to tell you why you're wrong. This is very important. And the example that I'm going to give you of overconfidence is this. So when I was asking the candidate all of these questions about HTTP, and for some context, this developer had like 15 plus years of experience, but all of these 15 years were in Angular and nothing else. And all he did was build small applications, small websites for mostly as a freelancer. So when I was asking all of these questions, he got very angry at me, visibly angry. And he was asking me why would he actually asked me this during the interview, why are you asking me all of these questions? Because I don't need this when I'm working. I never use observables or RxJS when I'm working with Angular. I'm using promises. And I was, to answer to that is, do you know this saying if you only have a hammer, all of the issues look like nails to you. This is basically the reason why we are asking all of these topics, why we are jumping around these topics and asking multiple stuff, because we are trying to see what kind of tool set do you have, right? If the only thing that you know in your environment is Angular or React or Node.js, whatever it is that you're using, right? Then everything is going to be solvable for you as a React developer. You will not be able to see other better solutions or other worse solutions. You don't have a comparison point. So so the tip number 3 would be to be confident but not overconfident. This is also very important. So this will be it for the first part of the first part of the talk. And I'm going to give you an example interview question right now, and I will tell you as a interviewer, what I would expect my candidate more or less to answer for this question. So, and I want you to guys to know that initially I had 3 topics that I needed that I wanted to cover, but turned out that if I talk about 3 topics in depth about JavaScript, it will take me more than an hour to explain. And I kept our organizers captive for about an hour trying to explain all of this stuff. So this time around I'm only going to do 1, but then we will have a Q&A section, and also I'm going to be here after the talk as well. So if you guys want to have a discussion, I'm going to be here so we can talk about multiple stuff. So the topic that I chose is going to be context, and the example question will look something like this, right? So the interviewer will ask you, okay, we all know that JavaScript, this keyword is pretty weird and it works in a weird way, and I want you to explain how this works, right? So as an interviewer, what I would expect my candidate to answer is basically 2 points that I want you to cover. And I will open up the example here. Let me know if you guys can actually see this. Oops, sorry, this one.
A bit bigger.
Okay, too big?
No, a bit bigger, yes.
A bit bigger?
Yeah, like this.
Okay, I will close up the terminal. Does it look good? Yeah. Okay, so first and foremost, I would expect my candidate to give some kind of definition of what the context is, right? Something along the lines of, this is a pretty basic explanation, but something in the lines of, this keyword refers to the object on which the function has been called upon. This is a very basic explanation, and I would also expect you to be able to come up with some kind of example, which is what you see here, that proves what you already said. So here you can see that I have a regular object. I will look over here because it's hard to move the mouse when I'm looking there. So I have a regular object and I have a isWindow function inside, and then I call the isWindow on that object, and then after that I'm calling it the isWindow by taking the reference out of the object and then calling it outside, right? And if I run this part, you can see that the first one will give me false. It will say that, oh, this object is not the window, and the second one will give me true, as we would expect. So this is pretty basic example, and I like the first half of the answer, I'm expecting it to be something along the lines of this. And then what I would expect you is to know that there are exceptions for this rule, as everything in JavaScript has. But let's go with the exceptions. So I will ask you to give me some kind of exception to this rule. So the first one would be that if I have a function which is bar, for example, and this one just prints out that this object, I will uncomment this part because I'm going to use it. Then if I call this bar, this will have the global inside. But what I can do, I can say foo equals bar.bind. So the very least that I expect my candidates to know is that, okay, not this, this should be object. That's what difference is. Is the very least that I expect my candidates to know is the bind, apply, call functions, which I don't know if all of you are JavaScript developers, but in JavaScript, functions are also objects, and you can basically apply the context of that function, which is basically what this refers to in that function, by using bind, apply, or a call. So in this example, the bar function will have the global function, and for the foo function will be the context that I binded it to. At this point, as an interviewer, I'm pretty satisfied with the answer. I don't need you to go any deeper than this, but if you can, that would be a very good bonus point. So let me give you an example of what else you can talk about this. So here is a pretty weird example, which I actually saw in a real code base, which is very bad that I saw this. But for context, I want you to imagine that I saw this kind of function call inside of another function. So I had something like this, and foo was passed here, and this was called here. And by debugging, I knew that the context for foo here was different. It was not the global object or what I was expecting. So, and the entire code base was in JavaScript, without JSTalk, without TypeScript. So it was pretty hard to try to stitch things together and understand the flow of the data and where this function was coming from. So I did a global bind search because that's the first instinct. And I went through about 500 references of bind inside of the project, and none of them were called on this thing. So at this point, I'm getting pretty frustrated. So I will not bore you with the details as to how I found this out, but what was happening is that I had an object, I had a function inside of this object, which was a regular function, and I had a arrow function here, which was called, which basically had a different this than what I was expecting it to. Oh yeah, I have this and function, right? Yeah, okay. And then something like this happens, so const foo equals a.bar. If you can give an example like this, this is pretty cool. And again, I want you to remember that this was done in a real code base. So, so never do this in a real project, because you're going to end up wasting somebody else's time who's trying to debug this thing, because it's a horribly written piece of code. But yeah, if you can come up with something like this, something pretty weird but pretty interesting for the interviewer to see, then you're going to get bonus points for this part. But again, I would never recommend somebody to do this in a real code base. So moving on, again, there are still a lot of things that we can talk about the context, right? We are not nearly done with, with this topic. So the way I approach these kind of questions is that I try to explain to them why the decisions were made in JavaScript. Because it is no secret that context is incredibly weird and the way it works in JavaScript. So to give you a good understanding of what was happening, so let's imagine that it's 1996. I think it was the year when JavaScript was announced. And Java and JavaScript are going to announce them together, a new version of Java and the first version of JavaScript, as according to ECMAScript convention. And for people who think that Java and JavaScript do not have anything in common, let me tell you this, they do. The only reason we have null in JavaScript is to be compatible with Java code, which is incredibly weird, but they do have some kind of relationship between each other. And yeah, it's 1996, New York looks like this, pictures look like this, it's like grainy, and it's actually very pretty, at least for me. And computers look like this. They have very limited resources, and your average software developer will look something like this. So let's imagine that it's that day and age, and we have very limited resources inside of our computers, and we have very limited resources, much more limited resources inside of our browser, which at this point in time, the only browser, like functioning browser, was Netscape. So let's imagine that we are the ones who are creating JavaScript. What we are trying to do is we are trying to optimize the language in a way that will use less resources, right? So let's look at this diagram. This is actually what will happen in a classical object-oriented language. So something like C# or Java create their object like this. So you have some kind of class here, and you have properties and methods for this class, and every time you create an object from this class, you will have a memory assigned for this object inside of your heap, and you will have all the properties and methods of the initial class inside of the object as well. So the creator of JavaScript looked at this scheme, and he thought that it is very wasteful because methods are not really something that change a lot, right? It's the same for every object. So why not keep it inside of a reference like here, which is the proto object. So if you ever console.logged or console.info an object, you will see a proto inside of it. And why won't we reference all of the protos of our objects to the primarily one, and then just call the methods there? And that is actually why the context is such a weird thing in JavaScript, because in order to achieve this, we need the context to be changeable. We need some kind of way to inform the OS which kind of object is this function is being called upon. And that is actually part of the definition. That's why it is like this. And to give you some context, like prototype-oriented programming was not something new at this point in time. There were quite a bit of languages already doing this. But the main difference was that JavaScript was the first one to base the entire language on this principle. Because other languages were, even though they had an option to do prototype-oriented programming, like the most notorious example is C++, you can do it in C++, but most people prefer not to, because it's a headache to do something like this. So yeah, if you can go into this kind of details and explain to me how the decisions were made and what do you think why these decisions were made the way they were made, you will get a lot of points. And after this, you can expect very less questions from the interviewer, because if you got into so much detail with one topic, you most likely got into so much detail to other topics as well, right? This shows a character. If you have a deep understanding in one topic, you probably have a deep understanding on other topics as well. And this is actually a hacky way of doing things, but most of the times what you can do during the interview is you can try to fish of a question that you know really well, and you can go incredibly into detail into that one question. And you will get a pretty good, you will leave a pretty good impression on your interviewer. And you can expect next questions to be much easier and much on the surface level. So, oh, it turned off, sorry. As a kind of a wraparound and a kind of a homework, how many of you actually worked with WebAssembly? I'm sure most of you have heard about it, but how many of you actually worked with it? You did. That's pretty cool. So a little bit. Okay. So what I would suggest is, and this will help you to understand how JavaScript actually works with functions, is to create a simple application. You can use any kind of language that supports transpiling into WebAssembly. I know that there are multiple languages that you can do in the most notorious ones are Go and
Rust.
Sorry?
Rust.
Yeah, Rust as well. And there is also AScript. It's some kind of superset of TypeScript, because we don't have enough supersets already. And yeah, you can transpile those and try to use JavaScript functions from those languages. You would be very surprised of what you can learn doing this, and expect a lot of issues with the arguments. That's a hint. And yeah, as to wrapping things around, here are the topics that I've asked a lot about, and these topics are the most weak topics that I saw from my candidates. First of all, data structures and algorithms. These may seem as not so important, but again, when the only tool you have is a hammer, blah blah blah. I want you to know that I do not expect my candidates to know all of the data structures and algorithms, right? But I expect them to know the basic ones, the very first ones. Like, I want you to know the difference between an actual array and the array that JavaScript uses. Like, why is it much slower than the other languages? I want you to know the difference and the implementations of queues and stacks and like maps, those kind of things. Because those are things that you actually will use if you know them. I expect them to know a bit about programming paradigms and the differences between different paradigms. And this is a fancy word. It basically means the differences between object-oriented programming and prototype-oriented or functional programming. And no, React is not functional programming. It just uses functions. Most importantly, if you can give me a programming paradigm that is not very well known, but is incredibly good, this will be a very good impression. An example of that would be a reactive programming, right? Because I think that the most known one of reactive programming is Angular that uses this, but most of the code bases that I worked in with Angular were not doing it correctly. They were not using reactive programming to its strengths. Also, the same I said for programming paradigms will go for design patterns. I will not expect my candidates to know all of the design patterns, right? But I will expect them to know the most important ones. So no-brainers are singleton, factory, dependency injection, and most importantly, I will expect them to know the use cases. I want them to tell me why would they use or why would they not use one design pattern over the other. And as if you want to go much deeper into JavaScript and understand how JavaScript works, I will recommend you to read the book You Don't Know JavaScript. It is freely available on GitHub, so you don't actually have to pay. But if you want a hardcover, obviously that one costs money. This book will go into incredible detail, maybe too much into detail, as to how things work in JavaScript. Like they will explain you the scope, and while the book is explaining you the scopes, it will tell you about how the interpreter will actually transpile the part of the application that uses the scope. And it actually gives you like assembly examples of how things work in JavaScript. And it went into sleep again. Sorry about that. And actually, this is pretty much it. So we got to the question and answer part. But before we get to this, I need to answer like, guys, sorry, do we have time for Q&A? Or? Yeah? Okay. All right. So if you guys have any questions, this will be okay.
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. Talk is really interesting. So basically, you showcased your interviewing process.
Yeah.
How you do approach interview. But what about assignments, technical assignment? Do you practice it, or what's your opinion on that?
Most of the times, I did not send. It depends on the candidate, right? Because when I was doing the interview process, I was basically the hiring manager myself, right?
Yeah.
So I had the freedom to choose if I want to do a technical task as well or not. Most of the times, if I can sense that the candidate is very strong senior, I would not send them a technical task after that. And most of the times, this is also a very dreaded question, but I ask that a lot during the interviews, which is, what is a challenging task for you? If you can give me an example what you did like in the last year or so that was challenging for you, I can already have a pretty good understanding of your level of knowledge, right? Because if your challenging task was an undefined error, you're most probably not a senior. But if your challenging task was how would I attach a system, like a design system to my application in a way that does not break anything, then you're most likely very close to a senior level. So yeah, I would sometimes do a technical task as well, but usually what I did was send them a bug fix. So I would send them a flawed project, and I would tell them, okay, figure out what's wrong with this and fix it. Like, and usually if you know what you're doing, it should not take you more than half an hour. That's how I imagine it. But at this age, with all the AI tools, I guess I will only do it if with screen sharing, because I would not I would not trust the candidate to do. Because I had an example with a candidate that was actually searching inside of the an AI tool the questions that I was asking him. And how I found out about it is that I asked him about TypeScript, and he told me that he never did TypeScript. I was okay. Then I gave him a technical challenge, And no joke, that person used the operator that strictly types the function call. Like you can have a function call and a exclamation mark at the end, which is a TypeScript thing. So yeah, that's how I found out that he was using an AI tool. And don't do that.
Yes. Well, can I ask a question?
Of course, of course.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, my question also somehow related to your previous answer. The question is, I mean, if it's okay if you're looking for the senior, but in case if you're looking for a middle, what the way you define, like, what enough experience for certain, like, expertise? Because sometimes you see the senior as well, 8 years of experience, and you ask him some questions, and you understand that, like, he's not a senior. I mean,
Yeah.
So what's your advice here?
Okay. So if I understood it correctly, am I hiring for a middle position or I'm hiring for a senior?
Yeah, I mean, if in case you need to looking for a middle guy, like,
Okay.
what do you expect from him?
So do you have objective levels for the senior or medium, or you just relate to yourself and say like I'm senior and basically I'm interviewing and you are medium compared to me?
No, I would say like the way I judge people if they are senior or not is basically how much deep I can go into one topic with this guy. That's basically how I validate.
So there is no like straightforward solution. It's always case by case.
No. And the one thing that
seniority for you is how deep you can go discussing context on the things.
Well, yes, more or less, yeah.
It's actually very subjective. Do you understand it?
Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
It's for example, my company will never hire with this approach in mind.
Okay. Yeah, well, one thing that you need to keep in mind is that all interview processes are subjective, it may come down to if your interviewer likes you or not. It also can happen as well, unfortunately, right? But the worst part is that you don't know which kind of interviewer are you going to get, right? Are you going to get one that is like me and likes to go into detail into different subjects, or the one that your company has? I'm not sure which practice that you're using, but also there are other markers that you can see for a senior. But for a middle developer, I wouldn't use those markers, right? For a senior, I would ask them about designing systems and bigger architectures. But for a middle developer, I never ask those questions because most likely, well, I assume that they will not be able to answer those questions. But for a senior, I would expect them to have at least some kind of answer when I'm telling them, oh, you're creating a parking space application, how would you do that?
Yeah, thanks. But yes, that leads me to conclusion that if I'm looking for a middle who cannot be proved in like advanced thinking, for the middle, they can just like use the AI tool for answering the questions. Or for example, he can like went to 10 interviews and just memorize all the right answers for your questions about context and stuff.
Yeah.
So for the middle, it's so tricky to find out, is he worth his money because he could be an imposter.
Yeah, and for most of the times, I only hired 2 middles actually. And most of the times the way I did it was basically giving them questions that are more about thinking, right? It's not about the knowledge. So you're trying to figure out if this person does have problem-solving skills, because that's usually what you're looking for in the middle. But yeah, I actually agree with you. It's harder to hire middle developers most of the times than it is for seniors, because like 90% of the time you can guess if the person is close to a senior level or not in the first 10 minutes of the interview. But for the middle, it's a bit tricky to understand.
So I would be happy if you share like these insights for thinking questions for the middle man.
Okay.
I mean, not now, not to spend other people's time.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Yeah, we can have a talk after this and figure out. Okay. Any other questions?
What would have been the 2 other subjects that you mentioned? Because if I understood correctly, you at first you wanted to show like 3 different topics, the context and
Yeah.
everything, and what are those two other topics?
Okay, one of them was JavaScript types, which was well, I was getting very into detail as to. I'm not sure if this is the thing that you're asking, like how much into detail it went. But yeah, basically one of them was types. The other part was JavaScript, asynchronity of JavaScript and how it worked. And very like widespread topics, right? This is something that you're going to see in a lot of interviews. And as pointers for like going deep into these topics, I would say to look into memory allocation for JavaScript types. And for asynchronity, I would suggest looking into how the entire structure works. So what is the callback queue? What is callback stack, and what is the callback queue and call stack? What are those? What is the event loop, and stuff like that. Okay.
Just one simple. So
Sure.
after all of your interviews, so are you satisfied with the people you hired? Like, or there were like someone you have to fire after?
No, I only fired one person who I hired as a middle developer.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, as you said, it is a bit hard to understand the level of middle developers. And no, for seniors we did not fire anyone. They were pretty much what we expected them to be.
And middle one, you didn't like how like slowly they work or what?
I think it was a bit of misconception of how performance would be for a middle developer, because we also wanted them to grow, but the company structure at the time was not really allowing the developers to grow and to work fast at the same time, right? So that one person was focusing on her growth, and as a result was doing the task slowly, and her manager was dissatisfied. I didn't like the idea of firing her because I felt like we were betraying, and we were actually at that point. But yeah, at that point they didn't really care and
Maybe
just
it
fired
was
her.
some miscommunication between different like managers, what you want, and then how fast you want to create
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, most of the times that's how it goes.
Okay. So, any questions? No? No?
Great.
Thank you for your talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, this is the LinkedIn, so if you guys want to connect. And yeah, I only put a URL for the example, but if you guys want, just drop me a message and I will send you the link.